seats in February.
Take your seats and we'll start on time. I'm just being reminded that I've got some housekeeping stuff to say first of all. We're going to go through this session without a break. Now that I know these seats are not really comfortable, so if you feel that you need to get up and wander around, then do so. This is a small, intimate affair. At least that's how it started out, before it grew and grew in popularity until we had to move it to Benton. I've got a number of things to say about this. The purpose of this meeting is to talk about neighbourhood planning. It's not to have a general moan about planning in SOVC. So if you now wish to leave, please do so. We can get back to the intimate affair that I'd originally planned for this. But seriously, there are a number of issues that I know that people have with neighbourhood planning, with the way that SOVC handles neighbourhood planning, and I have many of those issues as well. Now, we're not going to necessarily provide an answer for those issues today. Some of them may require more research, but what I want to do is to have a proper discussion about these issues this afternoon, and to ensure that that's done in a friendly and open way. So I hope that you will join in on that basis. I can see one colleague laughing at the prospect of getting away with that, but I do hope that we will be able to do that, because I do think it's on that basis that we can take this issue forward. And I'm grateful that we have two of our front runners here in Tame and Woodcote, who feel free to interject with some practical experience of what it is like to have done a neighbourhood plan and to be fully into the process of actually getting to the stage of wanting to do another one. We've also got Simon Common here, but I'm not putting you in the same category as them, as you're relatively new to the process. So with that, I'm going to set the scene by just going over a few of the things that we've done since 2010. You can have the first thing. The first thing I would like, this is just an aid memoir. The first thing I want to say is that the one thing that I'm very proud of doing is to have produced a national planning policy framework. Let me go back to what we tried to do with that. Before the national planning policy framework, guidance was a pile about that thick of documents, which you and I would never have been able to get through or to fully understand what was in them. What we did with the National Planning Policy Framework was to boil that down to just over 1,000 pages by cutting out all the verbiage that's grown up around it and just getting down to the essence of it. The only new thing in the National Planning Policy Framework is one word, and that's sustainable. The presumption in favour of development had been in the planning system since 1947. So just keep that in mind when you go through this, because what we have done is to actually make the planning system tougher by including the word sustainable in it in order to define that development. The second thing that we did was to take away any Whitehall central government activity for overseeing the numbers of houses that are being produced. There is nobody sitting in Whitehall saying that South Oxfordshire has to produce X number of houses. And we abolished the regional strategies, which everyone in the run-up to 2010 said were an absolute disaster and just increased the democratic deficit enormously in this. It took ages to abolish them because we had to go through a number of different hoops, but we did abolish them, and there are no regional targets from there. That means that the process of determining the numbers of houses, it has been localised to the district councils, or indeed to groups of district councils, with central government retaining the role of setting the methodology to ensure that we don't have a postcode lottery in this. make sure that councils are not just isolationists on their own, we have introduced a duty to cooperate. This is a duty to cooperate, not to agree with the strongest party claim. So, and I say that here in this room because it means that we do not have to agree with Oxford City's figures. There is no overriding ability to agree with Oxford City's council's figures since they have produced no local plan. And it's important to bear that in mind. Now, the assessment of need has come down in the case of Oxfordshire to the production of a strategic housing market assessment, SMART. Again, there is a methodology that is determined by central government, and otherwise it's down to local district councils to prepare that, and it is for local district councils to constrain the figures there rather than simply to accept them. I have it in writing from the Minister of Planning that the SMART is the starting point for a discussion about numbers, not the end point for it. In the case of Oxfordshire, as I'm sure that colleagues will say, the fact that other district councils have been through their local plan process and simply have accepted those numbers gives us a bit of a problem, and I'm glad to see that South Oxfordshire has decided not to necessarily accept those figures as being definitive in the whole process. The next thing that we introduced was neighbourhood planning. And I'm sure that a lot is going to be said about how you go about a neighbourhood planning, and to begin the process really, in many cases, of telling you what that is about. But what it is not about is simply handing over to parish councils total responsibility for the local planning system. It is a process of sharing responsibility for development of that planning system with the local planning authority, in this case the district council. And therefore there are certain activities that the district council has and certain activities that the parish or town council has, and they have to work together. They have to mesh together to make the system work. A neighbourhood plan has the force of law. It has the same force of law as the local plan when it is brought into effect, and I'll say something about that a bit later on. And that is not the force of law of statute, where it is either yes or no. It is the force of law of the local plan, which is based on policies within those plans that set out how planning should be developed and whether there are any other material considerations to be taken into account. So it is never going to be an easy black or white situation, but it's going to be a much greyer process of looking at it. And that's what I mean by there being a suite of documents, each of which has the force of law and the need to take into account other material considerations. And in fact, when I went to see Woodcote recently about this, their conclusion to me was that the thing that they got out of this, most of all, was that the district council took them seriously, that developers took them seriously, and they were invited to the same meetings and discussions to be able to discuss issues. That's right, isn't it, Jeff?
Yes.
Thank you. And I think that is an important point to see as the aim of where you want to get to. And I'm sure we'll hear from Woodcote a bit later. Now, one of the big issues is the existence of the 5-year land supply, and that is a district council responsibility. And if you do not have a 5-year land supply, then technically the local plan is considered out of date, and the policies therefore have to be judged individually. Now, when that happens, there is a process that is defined in case law in a well-known case that determines what should happen. And what should happen in that case is that the planning committee should sit down and should decide which policies are still in date. They have to make a conscious decision about that as part of the process of doing it. And in order to give clarity to that, the Minister of Planning has just introduced a new rule for 2 months, and I'll tell you why 2 months in a second, that says that where a neighbourhood plan allocates housing, and in that situation, it can be in date if there is a 3-year land supply. Now, 3-year land supply, if people don't have a 3-year land supply, they ought to go outside and shoot themselves now, because it is such a straightforward thing to have.
John, sorry, it's 2 years, not 2 months. You're probably confusing
sorry.
people. You probably just forgot.
Sorry, thank you. I stand corrected. It lasts for 2 months.
2 years.
Yes.
Sorry. So why don't you come up and do it? Thank you. And the reason for it lasting that is we're waiting for a housing white paper to come out that will deal with this issue on a permanent basis, and we'll come forward with some suggestions for how this should be dealt with. So this is a temporary position to overcome the enormous feedback that there has been, that you put all this effort into producing neighbourhood plans, and yet you think that they are worthless because the district council does not have a 5-year land supply. And I know that John and colleagues will come on to deal with that. This says that is not the case, so you will end up in the situation where a local plan is considered out of date, but the neighbourhood plan is considered in date. And that is an important distinction that goes to the heart of where we are trying to drive the planning system to give more importance to neighbourhood plans, as Theresa May made very clear in an answer to a question that I gave her in Parliament a little while ago. Let me just go back a bit on that to answer the question that I know we've had in this: is this just a sop to democracy? This whole initiative started because I sat where you are as a parish councillor, and I've seen applications come in, and I've seen the 3 boxes that you had to tick of approve, don't approve, or no firm opinion. I've seen them tick them, and I've seen them go into to SODC, where in all fairness, they have largely been ignored. And I thought that was a hopeless situation to capture local views. We live in a system which is plan-led, where the plan is everything, and it seemed to be the way of capturing those views was to get local people to produce a plan that gave the local view of things for issues around particularly where the housing should go, what it should look like, and what open and green spaces should be preserved within those areas. Now, that is how neighbourhood planning started. That was the reason for doing it, and that is the thematic reason why it has continued as it has, and the emphasis that the government is putting on it. So it was very, very crucial that it was there about empowering you, empowering us to take decisions locally. Now, that's all I'm going to say by way of introduction, and pass over to my colleagues. John, are you following me?
I am, indeed.
Good. Thank you very much indeed. Over to John.
Thank you very much, John. Good afternoon, everyone. It's very good to see so many people out on a Friday afternoon, but it's such an interesting topic. It's probably not sensible to stand up and start disagreeing with your MP straight away, but I'm afraid I do have to pick him up slightly on the point about submissions to parish councils being ignored. That isn't really the case. I think where people feel they are ignored, it's often because the comments that are coming back are not planning related. And we have had a challenge over the years. It varies from parish council to parish council. There's some incredibly good responses we get, but occasionally there's some weaker ones. The points sometimes made on those responses are not planning issues. And I hope some of the training programs that we've put in place in the past, and certainly some of the things that are being planned for the future, will help parish councillors understand the factors that can be taken into account in determining a planning application, and those that are not something that we can take into consideration. But as John said, we're not going to get into that today. We're going to talk about neighbourhood development plans. And I've been given a we are where we are slide with 4 points on it. I want to talk about the 5-year land supply in a little bit of detail because I'm still getting emails about it. But I know that the key issue is around the way NDPs are used in determining planning applications. So the ones that we have that are made and are now part of the local development scheme, how we use those in making determinations on planning applications. The key point is that suite of policies from the Henley Plan, from the Woodcote Plan, from the Sonic Common Plan, sit alongside all the other policies that we have. Largely those come from the local development, our local plan in 2012, but obviously we have lots of other documents, conservation studies, all sorts of things, affordable housing things, all those other policies against which we make a judgment. And the NDP policies are given exactly the same weight as all those other ones. And you will know, all those people who've looked at planning applications for years, that for any particular application, by and large, you can find a whole set of policies that say you should approve it, and a whole set of policies that say you should refuse it. Planning is all about the tension between what you want to do with a piece of land. And you've got to use those policies to make a consistent set of decisions. That's what it comes down to. It's consistency that we're trying to look for, so that there is some certainty, whether for landowners, whether for residents, whether for developers, in terms of the way the planning system works. And so, if you imagine that we're not considering NDP policies in the same way, you are wrong. Fundamentally, you are wrong. I've seen headlines, I think it was in the Henley Standard, that talked about the NDP being worthless. It absolutely isn't. The commitment that SODC has made in terms of not least the money we've put behind NDPs in the last few years, but also the time we've put into them, is probably more than any other district council in the country. We have got something like 33 plans underway at the moment, 38 even, which is a huge number of plans. Woodcote, I think, was the first in the country, or Tame was the first in the country, Woodcote was second. You know, we have been in the vanguard of NDPs, and I want that to remain the case. So don't misunderstand my support for NDPs. We want the decisions on planning to be made as locally as possible. It is up to you and your communities how much of that you choose to take on. But the opportunity is there, and afternoon sessions like today are about that, and please make the most of them. Just to talk about 5-year land supply, I'm still getting emails about it. We talked, I think some of you in this room were at the parish forum that we had in, whatever it was, October, November at the Rowing Club in Henley. And we talked a little bit about planning the 5-year supply there. I'm going to say the same thing again. I'm sorry if you were there that night, but I still hear about it. I still have a lot of questions about it. The 5-year land supply isn't something you plan for. It doesn't exist. It's a concept, and it's a concept that changes from day to day, almost from hour to hour. And it's about looking at what your housing need is, whatever that number might be, which is half the problem, and then saying how many houses are being built, will be built, or might be built. And the might be built is the big challenge. Because if you've got a site, say, 1,000, 2,000 houses, which looks quite attractive in terms of how to move forward, if that's only building out at 50 or 100 a year, compared to 150 or 200 a year, it makes a massive difference to what your 5-year land supply might be at any point. And if any of you have ever been to a planning appeal and heard the arguments, that's what the lawyers and the planning experts will argue about in those appeals, whether a site's going to come forward or not going to come forward, at what rate it'll come forward, and so forth. And that's why it's a very nebulous thing about whether you have a 5-year land supply or not. For a period of probably 18 months or so, maybe even slightly longer than that, SODC went into a series of appeals and said, we have a 5-year land supply. And we have it for a very important reason. In that our 2012 local plan, the inspector who heard that plan agreed that we should have 2 zones in the district. One around Didcot, which is where we're planning for most of our houses to go, by far 2/3, probably even more than that in terms of the numbers. And then the rest of the district. Now in the rest of the district, at that point in time, I think we were talking about a 9-year supply of housing. More than way over the 5 years that were necessary. In Didcot, we were under-delivering because we were relying on big sites, principally Great Western Park, but those who know the northeast Didcot or the north of Lady Grove will know about that. And that was way behind in terms of its delivery plan. It was included in our 2012 plan, although actually, effectively, they got the nod 2 years earlier when it came through the emerging local plan. And they hadn't done anything about putting a planning application in, and that's only happened more recently. But because Didcot was such a big centre of development, there were so many houses being developed there, the fact that that was, I think that was about 3 years, that was at 3.5 years, the fact that that was so much behind and had so many houses offset the much smaller number of houses, albeit for a much longer period, I'm sorry I'm getting the maths of it, for 9 years, that meant overall, if you aggregated those together, we did not have a 5-year supply. And we stuck out at appeals and said, no, the inspector said in 2012, 2011, we've got 2 housing zones, and that must be respected. But inspector after inspector after inspector said, not interested in that, not interested in what my colleague did 4 years ago. I'm merging all these together in your whole housing area, I'm treating them together, and when I'm treating them together, you don't have a 5-year land supply. So that was problem 1. Not of our making. We argued against it a number of times with some very well-paid lawyers, and we lost a number of times. There comes a point when you have to wake up and smell the coffee, which is what we did. So that was one point. The other point, of course, is the SHMA, which actually sets the figure itself. So previously, from 2012, we were working on a figure of about 560 houses per year. The SHMA, as John mentioned, county-wide study done with all the councils, has bumped that figure up. Now, what it's bumped it up to is actually a bit debatable in itself, which is part of the problem about working out your 5-year land supply. I might say it's 750. Adrian would probably tell you it's 775. Or would we say 825? No, 825. There you go, you see. So there's difference of views about what number you pick. Others might even say it's higher than that because you've got to factor in the Oxford unmet need, which some places have done. They could start saying it's 1,000 or even 1,200. But so all those things make it really difficult to tie down what a 5-year land supply is. But we've got to be practical and pragmatic in terms of how we get things done. If we spent all day wondering whether we did or we didn't, we'd never get anywhere. So we took a view a year ago, slightly more long ago than that we'd say, okay, we don't have one, and we'll work on the basis that we don't have one, and we'll proceed in our planning decisions on the basis that we don't have one, because the cost and the effort of trying to defend that we do have one, it's just not going to work. We know that puts us in a difficult situation, but it enables us to change our attitude towards how we treat planning applications, and by pushing through development plans, we hope that more quickly we can get some sites which frankly will be acceptable anyway through the planning system and get back to a point where we have a 5-year supply. That's part of the strategy. Of course, the other part is the local plan itself. We're not going to get into that this afternoon. Although someone will probably clever ask me a question at the end that will relate the two together. The key thing you're going to hear from Ricardo and Rachel this afternoon is a lot of detail about how we're going to make the NDP process work. A lot of that will fall on you guys, but the key message I want you to hear this afternoon is we will give you all the support you want for that. We've given significant financial support over the past few years. The fact that we've got an NDP team of officers who are working on these things, I think, demonstrates that internally as well. And there's a lot of things that we think you can do to help yourselves. It's about the quality of your plans. I know in the Hendy case, for example, there's been some concerns. Where's Julian? I've lost Julian. There's some concerns in terms of how we've interpreted that some of the policies that are in that particular document. We're all new to this, and there's inevitably going to be a degree of learning from it. And I think for those early plans, as they come up for renewal, and John's point about the 2 years is important on the 5-year land supply, as they come up for renewal, there will be things that we'll do differently to help us make the decisions that you want to happen in your community. But that's the offer to you. Get your NDPs, get them right, work with us, and you can affect those decisions absolutely directly. Chaps, over to you.
Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope I'm not covering the slides. Basically, the purpose of me being here today is to take an opportunity to introduce myself and my colleague Rachel. We're now going to be frontlining the response from SODC to help you produce neighbourhood plans. I'm very delighted to see so many familiar faces already, considering I've only been in the district for the last 2 months. And I'm sure myself and Rachel, we look forward to meeting those groups that we haven't yet met in person, and to work with you to produce neighbourhood plans. My presentation is mostly about how neighbourhood plans evolve through the process and the weight that can be attached to them. And this goes to some way in terms of actually addressing the question of how these plans can be used in determining planning applications. I'm also going to touch on the 5-year land supply issue, but since there has been quite a lot that has been talked about it, we'll be able to focus just on how it affects neighbourhood plans and what you can do about it. To give you a brief picture of where we are in the district in terms of neighbourhood planning, we have 30 designated neighbourhood areas. 21 groups are currently, 21 of the 30 are currently gathering evidence and drafting policies. 4 groups have already reached a pre-submission stage, so they're quite advanced and almost in a position to submit those plans to SODC. And we have 4 plans that have already been made. What the slide doesn't show you is that we have at least another 15 groups that have already confirmed that they are interested and are going to embark on producing a neighbourhood plan. So the numbers are actually more than what the slide is showing. Now, in terms of that is basically where we are in the district. A lot of groups getting very close to having a final draft plan that can be consulted with the community and handed to SODC to take the formal steps of progression. Now, the slide behind me has the formal stages of progression. It starts at the bottom on the pre-submission consultation, which 4 groups are already there, and a lot of other groups are getting very close to that stage. So by that stage, you would have already a draft plan ready with your policies and all your evidence gathered. Now, the purpose of this slide is to show you the process that you will go through and how the decision makers, and that include planning officers as SODC and planning inspectors, will be looking at your plan as it evolves through those final stages of the process. So the formula to calculate how much weight can be attributed to a neighbourhood plan is set out in national policy. So the national policy, the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 216, sets out how an emerging plan can be given weight in planning decisions. Now, you would expect that the plans would follow a straight line upwards as it progresses through the formal stages, but unfortunately that's not the case. The reality is that the plan has limitations in terms of its weight for a significant part of the process, and then eventually it has significant weight. So it is not a straight line, but rather a bit of a suppressed line which goes up quite significantly towards the end of the process. Now, the steps that we've got there, they are the submission of the plan to the council, consultation, examination. The council has to make a decision whether the plan should go to a referendum after the examination. Then you have the referendum itself. And those steps, they are basically bounded by 2 blue lines. Now, those 2 blue lines, they mark the section where the significant change will happen. From the bottom line, just above the pre-submission consultation, because there isn't yet a final version of the plan, it has almost no weight, although we should take into account the evidence base that you're gathering, and I'm sure the responses to proposals that happen at that stage would have more substantial responses from the parish councils who can draw from the evidence that is being gathered by the neighbourhood planning group to comment on planning applications. But in legal terms, at that stage, the neighbourhood plan would not have weight. But as soon as there is a final draft of the plan that has been consulted with the community and submitted to the council, then the plan has limited weight, and it basically embarks on the process of gaining more and more weight until its adoption. Now, the important thing to remember is that to resolve how much weight can be attributed to the plans throughout the process, we have to apply the formula given by National Planning Policy. And that basically is, we have to take into account the stage of preparation of the plan. So each step that it goes up, it gains more weight. We also have to take into account whether there are any unresolved objections. So when you consult the community on your pre-submission consultation, the objections from developers, from statutory consultees, you should take that into account, because a policy that has an objection And what really matters is not the number of objections, but the substance of the objection. A policy that has an objection will be given less weight than a policy that received no objection. So that is something to bear in mind as part of the process. We will revisit that ladder and apply these steps to show you how the plan would evolve in the process. Now, the final point that the formula gives us is the degree of consistency of the policies in the emerging plan with national policy, and that is the National Planning Policy Framework. A lot of people in here who have been familiar with working with neighbourhood plans will be also familiar with the basic conditions that a neighbourhood plan has to meet, and that includes national conformity with national and strategic policies of the development plan. So there's two basic conditions there, which are basically described by that part of the formula. So looking back at the ladder and the diagram showing how the plan progresses, we've got there at the top the filters that would allow you to decide or to understand how much weight the neighbourhood plan can be given. So the stage of preparation, whether there are any outstanding objections, and the degree of consistency of your plan with national and the strategic policies of the local plan. Yes?
Can I ask you a question, Ricardo? Obviously, you've explained very clearly the weight of the NP and when it will apply. But obviously, there is also sometimes a problem of developers gaining the system and the neighbourhood plan with a view of understanding exactly that chart, understanding that they're potentially going to lose out, and trying to jump a planning application in to beat the neighbourhood plan. And there's a whole concept and discussion about prematurity. And I wonder if you could just touch on that for a moment.
Yes, that is very important, and we will be touching on that later on in the presentation. So, if you were to apply the filters that are given by the formula to calculate the weight that can be attributed at different stages, you can then start to see that when you submit the plan to the council, we know that there is a final draft of the plan. We also know whether there are any objections that were sent in to the parish council at the pre-submission stage. What we don't know at that stage is whether the parish council has addressed those, or the steering group has addressed the objections in a manner that is satisfactory to the objector. So that issue is still pending, and that limits the weight that the plan has. If we move on to the next step, the first thing the council does when it receives your plan is to put it out for consultation. That allows us to test whether the objections that were submitted previously, whether they have been dealt with appropriately. And if we then get a repeated objection, it's an indication that possibly not, but it's not a guarantee. Or if the objection doesn't come back at that later stage, it's perhaps an indication that the objection has been resolved. So when we pass the plan on to the, when we pass the plan on to the examiner, he will be able to see whether objections have been dealt with. So we'll continue to progress with the stage of preparation, and we're starting to resolve the outstanding objections as we go through the process, so the plan can be given a bit more weight. The examiner will issue a report that will say and recommend modifications to ensure that objections are dealt with appropriately. The examiner will also give an opinion in terms of whether the plan conforms with national and local policy, which then moves us on to the third filter, which is the degree of consistency of the plan. So at that stage, when the examiner is issuing his report, we're starting to resolve the two outstanding issues, and the plan can be given more weight at that stage. But the examiner's report is not a legally binding document. It is an independent recommendation, and it's something that the council is required to do, but it's not necessarily required to follow the advice. So whilst the issues have been resolved, the council has to make a decision on the examiner's report to really put those issues to bed and ensure that those issues have been resolved. So at that stage then, the plan gains more weight. But one thing that we cannot forget, and this is based on experience, I'm sure you are aware, neighbourhood plans have been significantly modified at the examination stage with recommendations from the independent examiner. So one aspect that we need to be mindful of is, does this plan still carry the support from the community once it's been modified? And that is an issue that would only be resolved once we go through the referendum. And as soon as we go through the referendum, we've resolved those issues there from the formula. We know that the community still supports the plan as modified. The plan has significant weight. And we will be looking shortly in terms of changes, further changes that the government is proposing, which would speed up that later part of the process.
So I just wanted to ask where those objections would come from. Is that from within the council, looking at the different policies that they're balancing up against the neighbourhood plan?
The objections could come from landowners, it could come from residents, it could come from statutory consultees, it could be the district council. Any objection. What is really important is the substance of the objection. And you're probably aware as well, you have to produce a consultation statement with your neighbourhood plan. It is very important that that document details the comments that have been received and how you've addressed it. And sometimes you will not be able to appease every single objector, and sometimes there are merits to what they're saying, so it's important that you take that into account. And just touching on the previous question about how developers may try to use this and submit applications perhaps prematurely, there is national guidance covering the prematurity of planning applications in relation to neighbourhood plans. Because it's not part of the slide, I would suggest come and talk to myself or Rachel. We can send you the guidance and we can discuss that with you as well to see whether that would be something that would apply in your specific case.
That might be important to a lot of people, so could you just give us the reference that we can look it up?
Yes, I will probably need to look exactly the paragraph from national policy, but I should be able to later on. Sorry?
It's not in the NPPF.
It is not in the NPPF. This is actually in the National Planning Practice Guidance. And I can circulate a link directly to that guidance when we circulate the slides as well, so you can have access to that. Yeah, sure.
You said that the objections have to be, that the people who've made the objections have to be satisfied with the answers. So it kind of worries me that there may be people that making vexatious objections. They just don't want to be satisfied unless it's complete rollover. So how do you balance that out?
That is a very important point, and I'm sorry if it's caused. Basically, the question was, I mentioned before whether the objections have been addressed satisfactorily. So it may have given the impression that the objector has to be satisfied with what you do. That is not actually the case. There may be objections that will follow through the process. It will be through the examination that the issues will be explored, and it may be the case that the objection is actually not correct or raising a valid point. So whilst it diminishes the weight that can be attached to a specific policy, once you go through the examination and the council make a decision, the issue is resolved at that stage.
But in the meantime, you will actually downgrade the impact of the plan because of that.
Yes, it does limit the weight of the policy. And the reason for that, if we are to look at a specific case, if you were to apply the filters and the formula given by National Planning Policy Framework, and you looked at the plan after the council's consultation on the neighbourhood plan, you would see that we don't know whether the plan is consistent with national and local policies at that stage, because the issue will only be resolved after the examination. And we don't know whether there are any remaining objections from the previous consultation or any new objections, or whether they have been resolved. It is a matter of fact that if there is an outstanding objection on a policy, it will limit the weight that can be attributed to that policy. But as we progress throughout the process, those issues will be resolved and the policy will be attached more weight. But what we do know at that stage, and that's just to paint a picture of how that applies, is that there is a full draft plan. We know what the supporting information is, we know the evidence base behind it. And we also know which policies have been resolved or which objections have been resolved by the parish council, because those would not come back in a second objection on the council's consultation on the NDP. And to give you a picture in terms of how changes that are coming forward in the neighbourhood planning bill would affect the current situation, is that it intends to send a very clear message to decision makers that once the plan reaches the examination stage, and once it's been examined and there is a report, decision makers should have regard to the neighbourhood plan. Now that is something that the council already follows, and if you follow the formula provided by the National Planning Policy Framework, you will know exactly how much weight can be attached at the different stages. The other change that is coming is that following the referendum, the plan would automatically become part of the development plan. So there wouldn't necessarily be a significant delay between voting for the plan and waiting for the council to make the plan. I understand that in SODC it's not a significant delay anyway. The district where I used to work before, we would have potentially 2 to 3 months to get that part of the process done. So that is something that will change, and that is a picture of what that ladder and the process will look like once the neighbourhood planning bill is in place. So once you have the plan and the plan is made, now myself and Rachel, we've met a lot of groups so far, and there are some recurring questions, and I think this is a good opportunity for us to share a bit of information with you in terms of what are the questions that we're getting, the issues that we're being asked about. Probably one of the main ones is, will my plan actually work and do what I expect it to do after I go through the whole process? And how does the lack of a 5-year housing land supply affect the plan? Now, a lot has been said about the 5-year land supply. I've provided just a very small and simple definition of what it is. The council is required to identify and maintain a 5-year supply of deliverable land for housing. If we don't do that, what it means for neighbourhood plans is that policies that are relevant to housing, so potentially your site allocations and policies that dictate where housing will go, they will be considered out of date. And that applies to both the local plan and to neighbourhood plans. But is it all lost then? Does that mean that the plan will hold no weight? And I have been asked the question of whether the plan became invalid after that stage, and it's very important that we make it clear that absolutely not. Most of the policies within your plan will remain up to date. And these policies that remain up to date, they will be able to inform the decision maker, both planning officers at SODC and appeal inspectors. They will be able to inform decision makers of what is appropriate and what is not appropriate development within your communities. So it is very important that your plans, and Rachel will be touching on this with her part of the presentation, it is important that your plans are a bit more holistic and they take an approach that points to appropriate development as the logical and only option, that you target it in many different ways. You have policies that are pushing development in a particular direction. So in the event that one of your policies or two of your policies might be found out of date, you're still left with other policies that are long-lasting and continue to shape and push development towards a direction that is acceptable and appropriate. I think I had a question there.
Yeah, question. So in the neighbourhood plan, or the local neighbourhood plan, we've got more than the provision of housing required nationally. Then does that, the fact that the local plan doesn't have enough 5-year housing supply, does that invalidate that? So if as a community we put forward enough sites to well exceed our targets, surely that should have some weight.
We'll touch on that in a second because there is forthcoming changes that will affect that, and so I'll cover that in a minute. And here it is. Moves to strengthen neighbourhood plans. I think before we talk about the changes that are coming for the 5-year land supply, I'll just touch on what, again, National Planning Practice Guidance, and it basically informs decision makers about what to do in circumstances where the authority might be without a 5-year land supply. It says that other policies will remain in date, which I mentioned before. It also points out to a very specific part of National Planning Policy Framework, which is paragraph 184. And it basically says that planning permission should not normally be granted to a potential development that conflicts with a neighbourhood plan. And that is also part of the consideration and is deliberate to strengthen the role of neighbourhood plans. So that is something very important to bear in mind when you're writing your plans, that development that conflicts with it should not normally be granted permission. There will be occasions where there will be exceptional circumstance, but that is the bottom line. And in terms of the 5-year land supply, there has been a very recent ministerial statement that basically sets out that when you have a made neighbourhood plan that has allocated sites for housing, so long as the district doesn't have a severe lack of land for housing, your plan and your neighbourhood planning policies will be considered up to date for a period of 2 years. And that applies from the date the ministerial statement was issued, which was the 12th of December 2016, or it applies for 2 years after the plans have been made. So those plans that have already been made will have this protection from December for the next 2 years, and the plans that are yet to be made, they will benefit for this protection for 2 years. It is important to say that there is already a legal challenge to this ministerial statement. Is that what you're going to ask? Okay. But it currently still stands, and we'll have to wait and see what happens with this. But that is the current position. It already has weight, this statement.
Can I just clarify that? So the judicial review that some developers have put forward to Gavin Farwell's statement, that does not impact the statement currently? It doesn't invalidate it?
No, it doesn't invalidate the statement.
Okay, right. But it may do, depending on the
It may
outcome
do,
of the
and
judicial
you might be
review.
familiar with what happened with a previous statement on affordable housing.
There is no judicial review at the moment. They have given an ultimatum to the Secretary of State to come back with a statement, and then they will decide whether they go for judicial review or not. So it's even more obscure and remote than you first imagined.
Right, okay, thanks, John.
Are there any guesses as to time frames?
Any time frames?
How long do those processes take?
Yes, the Secretary of State is making a statement this afternoon.
Doesn't give him another week. Picked up a news flash.
Oh, right. Okay. He bought himself another week.
And how long do judicial reviews take?
Oh, it could take. It could take. I don't know the current timetable for the courts, but it could take quite a long time.
And this will stand until the end of that?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And touching on to the question that were asked just a few moments ago, the situation is that in the absence of a 5-year land supply, if you haven't got a made neighbourhood plan, you would be affected. If you have a made neighbourhood plan that allocates sites for housing, you would have that protection from the ministerial statement for the next 2 years. But the main thing to consider is that everyone producing a neighbourhood plan is part of the solution, and it's going back to what John Cotton said, that rather than just worry about the situation that we are in, is actually to craft a solution and how we're going to move forward. The local plan that is being prepared at the moment and neighbourhood plans are key to address the current housing supply position and the distribution of development. It's important that you have a role in coming up with a solution, and what you do, what your neighbourhood plans do, will affect your neighbours. If you produce neighbourhood plans that help address the situation, you're not only contributing to your own situation, but the situation of your neighbours. And as John also said, the district is very much behind neighbourhood plans in supporting you. So as well as drafting the local plan, we are going to be working very close with you to ensure that you can produce plans that help address this solution. I've taken the middle statement there from the South Oxfordshire website, talking about this very issue, the housing supply. And the district has a commitment to resist applications which do not respect the distribution strategy set out in the core strategy and saved policies of the local plan, and does not accord with well advanced or made neighbourhood plans. So that is part of the district's commitment. And like I said before as well, you have a vital role in informing what is appropriate and inappropriate development, even in the absence of a 5-year land supply. I think that is pretty much it from my side of things. Is there any questions?
Cardiff, there was the High Court judicial review of the case of Crane versus Secretary of State and Harbour District Council, where that actually said because the neighbourhood plan had been made, even though the district didn't have a 5-year supply, the neighbourhood plan stood and the developer was refused. Now, I can't understand why, if there's been a judicial review, which surely has set a legal precedent, why can't that be made more widely known?
I think we would have to look exactly on the case. If I remember correctly, that one, is that completed and published?
Yes, the decision was made in December 2014. I'll happily send you the High Court papers.
Yeah, I would be happy to look at it in terms of the details of that specific case. But it's important to remember there has been many other cases after that. And the very fact that there is a move towards strengthening neighbourhood plans with the ministerial statement, it indicates that that was not something that applied generally throughout the country. But we do now have something that points in a direction where if a neighbourhood plan has allocated sites for housing, we would benefit from a protection of up to 2 years. So I think it's important to bear that in mind, that things are moving in that direction.
Can I ask a question? If you have a case where the examination of the neighbourhood plan so thoroughly rewrites it that it loses the confidence of the community to the extent that they don't vote for it in the referendum, where are you then after all the work you've put into developing the neighbourhood plan?
The plan would have to go back to the stage of pre-submission,
right,
and to that consultation. It has happened once. It's not very common, but it has happened once where a plan was actually rejected at the referendum. And I think that's why it's one of the key messages is we have to work very closely. We should be able to identify potential changes that may occur to your plan at examination, and both myself and Rachel will be very keen to highlight those to you so that you go into that process with your eyes wide open, knowing exactly what could happen, so that we're not in that position where you might find modifications that are so significant that you then feel your community might not support the plan. It is possible, but that's what we want to work to avoid.
Do you have an idea of how many man-hours it takes to develop a neighbourhood plan? 1 hour. And how long the process takes?
2 years.
Minimum.
Right.
2 years minimum.
5 years. Yeah. I'm in a parish of 140 houses. We have difficulty finding parish councillors. We have no chance of writing a neighbourhood plan because we are too small. And therefore we are exposed to all the risks that you've created by protecting the larger villages, by giving them the opportunity to write a neighbourhood plan. Iron Dunstan.
I think it's important to say that, preparing a neighbourhood plan is a right every community has, and that applies even to communities without a parish council. I think a neighbourhood plan can be a big task, and it can take a lot of man hours, and I've seen plans that have taken years to be produced. I've seen other plans that have gone a bit quicker. I think it's important that we have a frank conversation. If it is something that you're interested in and you want to explore, come and talk to us, because it may be that you're not necessarily going to have to produce a plan that covers every single topic. You might produce a plan that just covers and focuses on one particular type of policy, and we can have that discussion with you and to sort of narrow down the hard work to what you really need to do, rather than having you do all sorts without the need for it.
Another approach that's been suggested is that there might be a group of small parishes locally.
That's what I was going to ask. That was my next question, actually. Can parishes work together?
And you've got,
absolutely,
in Henley and Harpston, you've got a perfect example.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
The question is whether parishes should work together in producing it. You're a small parish, whether it's a team up with others. And of course, you've got a perfect example in Henley and Harpston, having done that. John's got an even better example
in the north of the constituency in Kirkington. They're part of 10 parishes that are producing a neighbourhood plan. They're all quite small, but they have a common view of things. And the point that you made about choosing the subject of the plan to be what you want is a very important point. There isn't that's why there is no set format for a plan, and why they differ so much across the country.
Okay. Could you give us a definition of sustainable development?
Oh, wonderful!
I've just been asked for a definition of sustainable development. I'm going to have a go.
I'll let him have the first shot.
I think one thing that is important to know is that it is the role of a neighbourhood plan to actually define what is sustainable development for individual communities. Now, you will need to focus on how you can balance social, environmental and economic aspects to achieve sustainable development. So if I was to give a definition off the cuff, would be the type of development that balances those three, sometimes competing, sometimes actually contributing to each other's, those three factors.
Can I just say that there are more slides here? It might feel like we're at the end, but there are a whole set more slides. So can we just hold some more questions and get to the end, and then we'll do questions collectively at the end. We're never going to get there otherwise. It's already 3 o'clock.
When are we going to address this prematurity? I'm thinking particularly planning applications submitted already for large developments in places which are not yet ready to consult on their neighbourhood.
We'll pick that one up. It's a really important question, but we'll pick it up in the question section.
Hello everybody, thank you all for coming. Can you hear me at the back?
Well, come to that, yeah.
So Ricardo and I, we wanted to focus our presentation on how neighbourhood planning groups can produce plans with greater influence over what is and is not appropriate development. And you could say sustainable development as well. Previously, from Ricardo, you heard how neighbourhood planning groups can produce plans with greater influence and how the current 5-year land supply situation impacts housing policies. This next part of the presentation is about things you can focus on to create policies, to create strong policies and a more influential plan. I've chosen 5 tips, but it's not an exhaustive list. So my first tip is to work closely with SODC because
Can you find SODC anywhere?
Because neighbourhood planning is complex and each neighbourhood plan is different, but there are also similarities, it's actually important to just have an ongoing discussion with us. So some things that we can do is we explain the process, we can help you with your policies, we can give guidance on meeting the basic conditions, and we can advise on what has worked elsewhere. We also offer financial support in the form of a grant, and we can advise you on other sources of funding, such as the £9,000 available from Locality, which is a government-funded initiative. Another reason it's important to work closely with SODC is that a part of the process, the part of the process after pre-submission is carried out largely by the council. Also, when you create the plan, SODC planners will use it, and so working closely can aid the plan's translation and help it be used. Finally, neighbourhood planning is still in its infancy, and so we are all still learning. This is why it is so important to share experience, and so I strongly encourage you to speak to the other neighbourhood planning groups in the room, particularly the ones that have made plans, but also the ones similar to yours that are in the same position. Just share ideas. So my second tip, or lesson that we've learned, is to keep in mind that an effective plan supports, defines and informs what is appropriate development. What I mean by this is it is important to remember that the decision maker for an application is asking the question, are there significant and demonstrable adverse effects that outweigh the benefits of this application? The answer to this helps determine whether the development is appropriate or not. The current core strategy and the MPPF already starts to define what is appropriate development, and so it is the first place to look. Ask yourself, can I add locally specific detail or aid the interpretation and definition of what is already written without being overly prescriptive? If the answer is yes, then this can inform the kinds of policies and evidence to include in your neighbourhood development plan. We can also advise on this. A third tip, and I think Ricardo touched on it earlier, is a holistic approach is important if the plan is to be strong. Many types of consideration are taken into account when considering the appropriateness of development. In other words, do not just focus on housing policy when considering what policies can inform appropriate development. In the absence of a 5 or 3 year land supply, housing policy may be rendered out of date, but other policies will still remain. So as you can see, even if some of the policies fall out or are rendered out of date, if you've got other policies pointing towards appropriate development, they still count and they'll still have an influence. And so it's really worth exploring more than just housing policy in a plan and really gathering an evidence base to support those policies. So design, character, important views and valuable landscape features, when well evidenced and specific, are examples of things that influence decisions on what is appropriate development. This leads me on to evidence, and evidence is key, and I can't stress that enough. It directly relates to the strength of the plan. Much of the evidence you will require exists from the making of SODC planning policies and even the MPPF. There's all sorts of evidence that's already been gathered, and it's all mostly available online. What it needs is your analysis, your contextualization, and to be used to inform policies. Some examples of evidence documents and the type of policies they can support are listed here. So you've got character assessments, you've got landscape character assessments, landscape capacity studies, housing needs assessments, transport studies, infrastructure studies. Now these slides will be emailed to you, I think, and so you'll get to see this, but further. But just an example for now, one community in the district produced a landscape character study. It identified sites that were more sensitive to development and which were less, based on landscape character. This enabled them to write a policy that sought to enhance and preserve the more valuable areas and to point to appropriate development in this way. So it's really worth looking into these sorts of studies. So my last tip, and I think it's really important, especially at the beginning of a plan, but throughout a plan, to have a clear vision. Know why you're creating a neighbourhood plan, and really know, like really nail it down. Start in the steering group, then ask the question to the community. I strongly encourage you to consider the benefits positive planning can have on the long-term future of the parish. Think about the needs and aspirations you might meet through the plan, and come up with a really compelling vision that gets people on board and builds consensus. You'll find a clear vision will inform and provide a steer as to what is appropriate development, and aid in the production of an effective plan as a result. It also helps those reading the plan understand the thinking behind it and provide something with which to appraise its policies and decisions against, which can really help you in explaining the plan to other people, which is very important, because you'll have to get local buy-in to the plan. It's helpful for feedback in that way. A clear vision also helps us to help you on what kind of evidence you might need and the policies you might include in the plan to realise the vision. Finally, you will need to make decisions throughout the neighbourhood planning process, mostly on priorities and when considering where to focus resources. Your vision will help inform these sorts of decisions. So yes, having a clear vision, I can't stress how important that is as well. So to conclude, we want to support you, and feel free to get into contact with us. And that's all from me, so I'll pass you back to John.
Well, thank you very much. What I'm going to do is to tell you what's going on in Parliament now, which doesn't invalidate the whole of what you've just heard. We're not changing the system completely. Could you switch the slide on? The first thing I'd like to introduce is this document. It's a document produced by something called the Local Plan Expert Group, and it is incredibly important to the future of this debate. The Local Plan Expert Group was set up by the Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, and included a number of people, including myself, in it, with the aim of a root and branch overhaul of the local plan production process. By doing that, we have identified a whole number of areas that actually have a big impact on the number of houses, for example, that SODC is looking at having to produce. And the recommendations that we've got there I'm anticipating are coming through in the Housing White Paper, which is due out, I should say, imminently. I can't be more specific than that. And in the Neighbourhood Planning Bill, which is going through Parliament at the moment. Next slide. What we set out, if I can group all the recommendations into three, they are firstly to simplify and shorten the process of plan making. We don't think it's appropriate for a district council to be producing a local plan of 400 pages. To help ensure that housing and other needs are met. And thirdly, to give communities more control over development in their local areas. And some of the highlights of this are to be absolutely clear about the approach that is taken for strategic housing market assessments, to make sure that the process of producing them is understood and is very clear, so that there is none of the difficulties that SODC has got itself into as a result of the situation in Oxfordshire. So there is a clear and simplified approach to producing housing needs that effectively takes out the bit about where at the moment that is added in, which is an element that's in for employers to say, okay, you produce your need, your housing need based on growth of households, and then we want an element in for growth of businesses. We actually think that's double counting, and so we want that taken out. We also want a standard calculation of the 5-year land supply, and we want to ensure that that is absolutely agreed by all parties, but that once it is agreed and it's taken away from the local plan process and put into the annual monitoring of the council, once it's put into that, it's agreed and cannot be challenged in the court for a year. until the next annual monitoring report. So for that year, you have absolute certainty as those figures, and of course for the next year, you agree with the next figure, so that effectively you get a rolling certainty for these things. There's less focus on housing debates and a reconnection with community issues in the whole of the process, and that there is a greater role for neighbourhood plans with local plans dealing only with the strategic issues, giving a bigger role for neighbourhood plans to deal with all the local implementation of the strategic issues that have been identified by the council. So there's a statutory duty on local authorities to produce local plans for the first time. For the first time, a statutory duty on local authorities to produce local plans. Limited changes to the National Planning Policy Framework. That is not limited changes now, but to say that you can only make changes every 5 years to it, so that again you get some certainty to the process. A much shorter approach to the whole thing, and as I said, that local plans concentrate on the strategic issues, leaving a clearer role for neighbourhood plans, a standard approach to the 5-year land supply, and that inclusion of the 5-year land supply in the monitoring report. So that's what comes of that. The effect on this area will be arguably to lessen the amount of housing that is required.
Wow.
Thank you. And I think that is really important. We've been through this with a fine-tooth comb to determine what is wrong with the system and what is right with it. There's a lot that's still right with it, but it is to take out those things that are wrong to make it simplified. The other thing that we're doing is the Neighbourhood Planning Bill has gone through the House of Commons and it is in the House of Lords at the moment, and it strengthens the neighbourhood planning process. It strengthens it at the beginning of the process, because at the beginning of the process, at the moment, the District Council naughty District Councils, which SODC is not, can hold up the process of accepting the area designation for a neighbourhood plan. And we're taking that away from them, so that once you've decided your area and consulted on it, that's it. And we're also taking away the ability to hold up at the end of the process, we've already highlighted it, that once you take the plan to examination, and the examiner for that is chosen jointly by you and the neighbourhood, once you've taken that to the examination, it has full weight. And the district or borough council has no ability to say no to it. It automatically becomes part of the system. Michael.
You said it had reduced the SMAR for this area, presumably in South Oxfordshire.
No, I mean for Oxfordshire.
And for Oxfordshire as well.
Yeah.
So we'd also be protected from unmet need from others.
Well, there is a question of Oxford's unmet need, which is best solved by Oxford producing a local plan. And anything that you can do to put pressure on Oxford to produce a local plan would be very welcome, I'm sure, by everyone in the room. There is also...
We're doing our best.
Good, thank you very much.
John, there was another sort of second accounting, double counting that CPRE identified within the SMAR, which was for affordable housing. The amount of affordable housing was calculated, and then rather than it being proportionate to the whole amount of houses wanted, it was added on.
Right.
Is that going to be resolved?
I have to answer. I mean, the SMAR, I think it's one of the flaws of the SMAR that it takes that approach, particularly in the case of Oxford City, because the affordable housing need in Oxford City was calculated at 16,000 houses, but the overall need for housing in Oxford City was calculated at 14,000 houses. But they doubled up the 16,000 and got to 32, so the target was 32. And it's one of the absolute madness elements of the SMAR. It's one of the reasons I refuse to take their on that need.
So is that going to
But
be addressed?
the problem is that the SMAR is the SMAR, and because it's been through a series of inquiries, it has a significant amount of weight. We are currently in discussions about the SMAR with the Planning Inspectorate for South, And just all I would say is watch this space.
Yeah, but we want to address those points in the rules about how you set the SHMA at the beginning of the process. The other point is that
just to answer Michael's question, take the pinch of salt, because these things are very hard to do. But if we took the OAN calculation as presented in the LPEG report, the figure in the SHMA would probably come to about 70,000 houses from 100,000. But that's a bit like that. I'm not saying exactly right, but something of that order. Yeah. But we don't know yet whether the government is going to accept the OAN calculation as presented by the expert group, or indeed make some modifications to it which could affect that number anyway.
I'm afraid we all have to wait for the white paper.
The worrying part is the market signals part, isn't it? If house prices go up even more, that could ratchet up the SHMA, even though we think we're reducing it.
Can I have a think about that question? Then just let me finish off this. The other thing that the Neighbourhood Planning Bill does is to have a proportionate process for modifying the neighbourhood plans when you come to redo the neighbourhood plans, which Tame is in the position of doing, which Woodcote is doing. The process for doing that needs to be proportionate, because at the moment you have to start from the beginning and do the whole thing again. And this is effectively it's a system of self-justification of whether the changes are significant enough to warrant a complete going back to the referendum and an examination for that. And the last bit on this is that the process for support for neighbourhood plans should be transparent. And we've heard how SODC are supporting neighbourhood plans, but that needs to be replicated across other districts in the country to make that absolutely clear. So those are the things that are going on in Parliament at the moment that affect the neighbourhood planning process, and I think that leads very, very clearly into a question from you to any of the four of us, or indeed if you want to come up and join us up here. John.
Can we cover off the issue of prematurity, please?
The issue of prematurity, I see the issue of prematurity in this way. If you have firmly started a neighbourhood plan, rather than just saying that we're going to do a neighbourhood plan, and a developer comes along which proposes something that prejudices that neighbourhood plan, I think that is a perfectly good example of prematurity. And my opinion on that would be that the planning inspector ought to take that into account. And there are some examples where the planning inspector has taken that into account.
I think the council also needs to take that into account, not just the planning inspector.
Can I read you the paragraph, the salient paragraph from the planning guidance, which I'll link to later on. It says this, I'm reading the last bit, there is a bit before this, but I think this is the most relevant bit. Refusal of planning permission on grounds of prematurity will seldom be justified where a draft local plan has yet to be submitted for examination, so that's in our case, we haven't submitted the draft yet, or in the case of a neighbourhood plan, before the end of the local planning authority publicity period. Where planning permission is refused on grounds of prematurity, the local planning authority will need to indicate clearly how the grant of permission for the development concerned would prejudice the outcome of the plan making process. So that's what the law says.
And that's precisely the point that I was making, that if it prejudices the outcome of the neighbourhood plan, then it should be taken into account for prematurity.
I have a point further on that. Given the numbers that Ricardo talked about, it seems about 90% of the parish councils in the area are in the very early stages where we are afforded a limited amount of protection. So what's the budget like in your legal budget to defend the inappropriate and hostile development applications that are likely to come in before these neighbourhood plans have any sort of protection on the areas that they're covering?
Can I ask that question by saying I think you're taking a depressingly negative view of how it might work, but to get the nub of your point, SODC has never shied away from the battles where we think we can win and we should win. And I would point to the Chinner appeal as an example of that. In the end, we lost. I think wrongly, but we lost. And we put a significant amount of money into that.
And that was one.
That was one, yeah. And these things are expensive. They're tens of thousands. I don't know what the final bill for that was, £50,000, Adrian, something like that. So, I mean, they're not insignificant, and that was just the JR part in mind.
Yeah, but isn't that the point?
Yeah.
That you've got a whole pipeline of neighbourhood plans.
Let me say this.
Well, let me just finish the point for the clarity for the room. You've got 90% of your neighbourhood plans in your district at early stage with limited protection. If you can't stand up with and because you haven't got a budget to defend against developers like Welbeck Land, it'll be open season for the next 18 months.
I will make this commitment. Whilst I'm leader, there will never be a chance where we don't fight a battle against the government of the money. Never. These things are too important, and even at £50,000, we will afford to do it. Even if Adrian has to sack a few of us. Or not take his bonus, or whatever it might be. What we talk about.
Can I just add to that in terms of defence? So, yeah, money is one thing in defending appeals, and I think it's important when John mentioned about appeals we have lost, although we have put a good case up and we haven't been successful. What we didn't get as an authority is cost against the council for not putting forward a reasonable case. So I think that's an important fact, and that's something I treat. If we get cost against us, I haven't done, or my team haven't done a good job. But we have done, we did as best we could in terms of defending the council position. I think the thing to mention about protection, which is important in terms of neighbourhood planning and your communities, is in a big swathe of our district, almost 2/3 are covered either by Greenbelt or the AONB. And they take an added level of protection. So in terms of neighbourhood plans, or in terms of speculative development where we haven't got that 5-year land supply, we actually can rely on things like Greenbelt. No chance it applies. I mean, the government's been quite clear in terms of the 5-year land supply that actually housing supply and housing need doesn't override the importance of the Greenbelt. And likewise, we've been successful in the AONB to defend a similar situation where we haven't got 5-year land supply, but issues like the landscape, and that's what the AONB is about, is landscape character. We can demonstrate very well that takes a higher level, a higher presence over the housing need issue. Now, I accept there's a swathe in the middle of our district that has that risk, and you're seeing our villages of Chinner, of Benson, as examples, even Chelsea, are at risk and have been at risk and have a number of applications around them where we have not been successful in winning those appeals. So it is a big chunk of our district is protected, but I accept that in the middle we haven't been as successful.
Can I just put some context on appeals, because people might feel we're losing ground. One of the government's performance guidance at the moment is on the number of appeals a council loses. And I think their threshold is 10% at the moment. I think I might say that they're about to make it 10%, I think, for this year. They're about to make it 10% for this year. There are something like 20 or 30 councils in the country who will fall into that, maybe not quite that number, but certainly 10 or 20. SODC's is about 1%. So we are way off whatever would be regarded as being a performance issue in terms of appeals lost. So whatever you might think about it, however hard individual appeals might hit communities like Benson, I know, Chinner, I know, the decisions that we've lost in those ones hit us all very hard. It is a very, very tiny number of what we actually return. So just keep the context of that.
I just bring Adrian out to say about inconsistency in the inspector's decisions. That's been a big thing.
Yeah, I'm careful what I say, but obviously in terms of our experience on the planning inspectorate, we've had a number of appeals arriving a day after each other, and they have a different interpretation of our local plan, a different interpretation of our 5-year land supply, and that is very frustrating. We tried to challenge that in some circumstances and we weren't successful. What I am doing at the moment with the team is where we think we've actually got a reasonable case, we just write a letter of complaint saying we're not having that inspector in our district again. And generally we are successful in doing that. Can't always guarantee that because it's not my decision, obviously it's the inspector's decision that does that. But it does help to actually focus down. We're not an easy council to overcome, or to put to one side. when we do raise issues, we raise good planning issues, and we've been successful in terms of getting what I call good qualified inspectors in our area.
I have a... Hang on. Can we take this one first and we'll come to you? Okay, thank you.
You just covered some of the points I was going to raise. It's really the larger towns and villages that have got neighbourhood plans because they've got a housing allocation. With the new regulations which you said about 3-year land supply, those plans have got quite a bit of protection. As a consequence, developers are descending those areas which haven't. Now you said A and B, easy for you to find out. But in the case of my own village, parish, Shipley, we do not have green belt regulations. And so we're finding, as in the Iron Gunson, these people are descending upon us, and we have absolutely no protection. We've decided we're making a neighbourhood plan. You suggested we should do it with other people. A couple of examples. We've got to move quickly because time is not on our side. If we join with a lot of other parishes, it would slow it up. So we decided we're going on our own at a cost. And when you think of other villages like us, it's a waste of taxpayers' money that everybody is having to rush into neighbourhood plans to defend ourselves. Now this 3-year land supply, which is going to be very helpful for neighbourhood plans, why can we not have the same protection for the local plan that we've all relied upon in the smaller villages to the rest?
Firstly, on the timing of this, I'm going to give you the example of Benson. John, do you want to say something about your own plan?
So in terms of our neighbourhood plan, we started, first of all, the neighbourhood plan back in 2012. We couldn't get enough volunteers to come forward to help us. At that stage, there wasn't the level of speculative applications that there is now. So the plan folded in early 2013. Because of the number of speculative applications around in Benson, we started the plan again in January 2016. We're doing a fast track version, say fast track, with the help of funding from SODC, which has paid for a planning inspector consultant to help us with the plan. And we are now at the stage where we have just about finished and we're aiming to submit the pre-submission document next month. So it has taken us 11, 12 months to do the whole plan. For somebody starting a plan, do not underestimate the amount of work entailed. It is horrendous. My biggest issue is the fact that whilst we're doing these plans, we really need support and help to fight these speculative applications. The developers know we're doing a neighbourhood plan. They're all getting in their applications before we reach the pre-submission stage and before we reach the adoption stage. We need some protection up to that point.
On the question of the 5-year land supply, I think a better approach to this is to provide certainty over it by, one, agreeing the methodology and then ensuring that once it goes into the annual monitoring report, it's not going to the report. Which is a perfectly legitimate way of ensuring that once it is in there, it is not going to be challenged. It is not going to be challenged.
That all takes lots of time, John.
It doesn't take lots of time. It can be done at the stroke of a pen. It can be done at the stroke of a pen, very, very easily. And all I'm waiting for is for the housing white paper to come through to let me know whether that stroke of the pen is going to be made or not.
John, I have a very important point related to this. I'm chair of Southern Common Neighbourhood Plan Working Party. We had our referendum at the end of September, and 48% of our electorate voted, and 94% of them voted yes to the plan. We consulted extremely widely, not just with SODC, but with residents and a variety of developers, etc., etc. Now, the point I'm making is the examiner realised that there was an objection to one of our sites. This is a site which has been allocated on the SLAR, the Register of sites that we took as our starting point. This was a 2.1 hectare site. On advice from SODC and from our consultants, we reduced this to 1.5 hectares. This went through the whole process and part of the plan. The examiner referred to an objection by a developer, namely Gallagher Estates, but basically rejected that objection, said our plan was sound and is gone through. Now we have an application on our site, the 26th. Gallagher's are in actual fact proposing a much larger site, 6.65 hectares, which is an extension of this particular site, which was never considered by us, never considered as a site by SODC on the Schloss. And yet they want to increase by a very significant percentage the number of homes in our plan. Effectively, in my opinion and my colleagues' opinion, the parish's opinion, blowing it basically out of the water. Now, I had a meeting with two planning officers, including the planning officer in charge, who argued that this was an extension of the site and therefore was part of the allocation in our neighbourhood plan. Now, if this view holds good, it means 2 others out of our 5 sites are part of a larger site and without doubt will be extended. And therefore, as far as I'm concerned, blows our neighbourhood plan, 4.5 years, a lot of money, a lot of time out of the water. And I'm really asking...
Okay. Well, the first thing is obviously it's a code application, so we have to be slightly careful about the detail we get into here. I think it's a very interesting example of the difficulties that will always be in determining planning applications against policies. The policies are created with one thing in mind and something else comes forward and you've got to make a judgment about that. What I would say is that let's just wait and see what comes out at the end of that one. But whichever way it goes, I think there'll be an important lesson for NDP writers in the future about how they might guard against that in terms of a future application, because that's about, as Rachel was talking about the landscape boundary, it isn't just about the strict policies of saying here's a site that we put a red line around and we're expecting 50 houses or whatever it might be on that site. It's about the context of that in the overall plan, and it's really important that the policies are written in such a way that there are multiple ways to make the point or achieve the outcome that you're trying to achieve. Lee, I'll come to you in a minute.
My planning one. Could you explain what a wind force is?
I'll give the technical explanation and I'll try and give a layman's view so you actually understand what I'm saying. The bottom line, a windfill site is a site that we haven't planned for. It's not allocated, it's not identified in a plan or a neighbourhood plan. It's a site that's just come forward out of the blue almost in some ways that we hadn't expected, and we would then include that as a windfill site. Any sites that were called windfill is about housing numbers originally, and they are counted towards our housing supply. That's important. What we can't do is we can now take into account of windfall in the future. So what potential windfall sites will come forward that we haven't identified in the plan as allocated sites, we can accommodate or consider that there will be something forward which helps us with our overall projection of supply housing.
Okay, I might. If we've got a site that we know that's going to be developed, and we were thinking that that could be in our neighbourhood plan, and that site could be developed. And yet the plan said we can't include that, that's a meaningful design. And yet that could cover our whole neighbourhood plan needs.
Sounds like you're talking rubbish, Charles. Yeah. If you want to be allocating that land for housing,
if I tell you where it is, it's in Sydenham, Sydenham Grove.
Right.
Sohar Housing.
Yeah.
There's 8 houses on it. They're demolishing 8, and they're saying they're only going to put up 8.
Right.
So we're saying, well, if you put up more, that goes towards our housing needs. And also at that last meeting we came to in October, November, and we said every single new build house goes towards our target. We want them to be able to justify, and they say they're taking pre-planning advice. If they're knocking down 8, why are only 8 being replaced on that site?
Can I, let's not get into the specifics of each individual case, but it's an interesting point, isn't it? Is that potentially, if you allocated it in your NDP for 15 or 20, I'm not quite sure how they decide it is, it's highly unusual to have an application that comes forward for fewer houses that are allocated in the plan. But ultimately, that is the landowner's stroke developer's choice. They will put in the application, irrespective of what your policy says and what our policy says, they will put in the application they want to do, and that application, however frustrating it is, has to be determined in accordance with the policies. And it may well be that our application comes forward for half the number of houses allocated in an NDP or local plan that we say yes to because the developer in that particular case can make an argument for it.
Basically, if they're saying it's windfall,
that is nonsense. It's okay.
So you've got a firm answer. You've got a firm answer on that. Yeah.
I've been undertaking quite a review of neighbourhood plan appeals across the country, and one thing that's very, very comforting, and this echoes what the committee, Rachel in particular, was saying, if you have a good, strong vision, good, strong objectives, you are very well covered. And this is because inspectors like to see it. I think it's the one item that's come up again and again that's been a bit of a case winner in neighbourhood planning areas. So the gentleman over there was saying, if you have a good, strong vision, you may well find that within your appeal as much as anything else. So good, strong vision, lots of objectives, clearly defined. Remember, there is more than one way to skin a cat, but effectively make sure that the development, when it happens, is in line with what we're committing to. And you only achieve that through the original objectives.
Lee Rawlins from Surrey Common. I'm really delighted that the collection of all of you are here for this question, because I really believe we need clarity over the scope of neighbourhood plans to write policy. The Localism Act said that we can write policy in neighbourhood plans if they have regard to national policy, if they're in general conformity with the strategic policies in the development plan for the local area, and they must of course be compatible with EU obligations and human rights law. And you would think from the above that there's considerable local latitude to make neighbourhood plans with policy appropriate for the neighbourhood area. But this is not the view that we have seen with SODC. We did in fact try to write a policy on sustainable development, which was mentioned earlier. We were told that sustainable development was God, and you couldn't even look upon the face of God or try and make an image of it because you just couldn't. And we put some stuff in about economic and social and environmental. That was struck down. It was struck down overnight. We have, after 6 years, we still don't know what is said to be the strategic policies. We were told that because neighbourhood plans are not allowed to be a vehicle to block all development, quite rightly, that they're also not permitted to have a spatial vision or policy, cannot limit some types of development to some areas, such as inhibiting Gladman-type sprawl on the countryside outside the established envelope of the existing urban development and allocation sites, which touches directly on the point that Barry was making there. And we were also told that because the NPPF has a presumption in favour of sustainable development, then no NDP may limit or spatially direct development of any type in any way. We tried to have a settlement boundary policy. We tried to have gaps between settlements policies, and these were struck down, and they were struck down pretty much overnight. We took a year to put them together. We made detailed references to all the SODC policy documents and national policy documents. What actually happened was our policy was taken, the version that was asked for was without all the references. It was then pretty much machine gunned, and we were told, you go with this. Anyway, I'd really just, the real point I'm making, John, I think, is you've always put forward, and I think rightly, that neighbourhood plans should be a proper opportunity to write policy. And I think we need some guidance, please, about what is the appropriate policy for an MP to write. Let's not all waste time, and lots of people are about to embark on plans which would be spend an awful long time looking at policy and then have them devastated at the end. We need to have a guide about what's reasonable for us to write this policy, and what's out of court, and we shouldn't even begin to start.
The difficulty with that is, and it's why we don't have an overall format for neighbourhood plans, is because they differ enormously depending on the size of the community and the interests of the community. And I think that is an enormous advantage to them, and I wouldn't want to take that away. And you know, if you look at the neighbourhood plans that are being produced here, no two are alike, except that none of them run to 400 pages, which I'm very pleased to see. But Thames is completely different to Woodcotes, which is very, very different to yours. Do you want to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, Lee, I don't want to get into rerunning all the things about your plan.
I'm looking forward, not back.
To address your point about guidance, you've got to write a plan that I think that if you read the policies, someone would know those were about Sonning Common.
Yeah.
That, in your case, that's the point. Is that they should be really locally based,
yeah, and
understand that you're really trying to affect your place and the reasons for it.
Yeah.
So, repeating or echoing things that are in the district council's plan and saying we'll just have the same is actually, in my view, a waste of space, because you're going to get that anyway. So you need to focus on what's there. I think the particular challenge in your case on those three issues about sustainability, you can't redefine sustainable development in your plan. That's certainly true, because it's just not, you can't do it. The government says we'll define it, and it wouldn't be
said earlier we should. But
the problem around settlement boundaries and gaps is that the local plan doesn't take that approach, and therefore, in terms of general conformity, you wouldn't have been informative. But I would say this to you: ultimately, it should be it's your plan. And it should be your plan that goes forward to examination. So we had a plan in a district which actually failed the examination, and we had a lot of conversations with the parish council concerned and advised it not going through to examination because we thought it would fail. They wanted to take it through, and we supported them taking it through. It failed. And so you've got to make a decision. We'll give you advice and say what we think. If we have concerns about policies in terms of their overall impact, we may well say to you, we're going to argue when it comes to examination and say you shouldn't have that, but it is your plan, and you've got to take it through and make the judgment. One final point, very few plans have failed at examination, but one locally that did was in Wantage, and go and have a read of the examiner's report, because he talks about, I think it's fair to say, their negative attitude towards development. Is that a fair paraphrasing of what he said? So, Malcolm, you talked about being defensive. I'd be very concerned about a plan that was created that was a defensive plan. You've got to be positive. You've always got to be positive and be planning for the future. However hard that feels, in Cromarty, for example, it must feel like they're in a battlefront with all the things that are coming forward. But I still think they should do a neighbourhood plan, because you've got a plan for the long term, positively. So
John,
what matters
only a quick point I'd make on the settlement boundary and gaps is that we have seen in Lochs Ride in Bracknell, we have seen in Cheshire, where it's gone to appeal or it's gone to the Secretary of State, and those policies have been upheld and actually given as the reasons for blocking Gladman and Gallagher and the like.
You're absolutely right, and we've also seen ones where they haven't. So it's horses for courses, isn't it?
It's just that you just said that we shouldn't be defining sustainable development, but Rachel's very words half an hour ago is that we should define what is sustainable development in a community.
Certainly locally, I meant we should be trying to redefine on the national stage what sustainable development means on the national stage. How that applies in your community, absolutely. But that's not the same thing.
Julian?
Yes, I want to ask about updating, because looking at Mr. Barnard's statement, it was 2-year life. Local plan automatically puts all the different plans out of date, so we have to update them with the new local plan. Well, can I ask the question and check, is that right?
It's not my view, I don't even.
Do we have to update our neighbourhood plans when your new local plan comes out in 12 to 2 months?
The issue will be, as the new local plan is addressing new evidence, which is affecting the SMART, has a knock-on effect down the line. So what I would say is you've got a lot of the neighbourhood plans you're looking at now already knows about the SMART, already thinking about it, so it's already dealt with it and therefore won't need to be updated. The issue is whether the local plan brings something new in that it's not in conformity with. That's the issue.
Right, so probably neighbourhood plans that are already in existence, like the 4 of us, probably need an update.
Almost, I think for those ones, so for Henley, if there was an additional allocation of houses for Henley, then yes, that would make the numbers you've worked on out of date. And so you have to do an update. But you don't need to update that portion of it. You could then do a fairly rapid process around the other elements of it, say all those things are still true that we thought were true 2 years ago. This is the only bit we're going to change. And the government, I think, is going to issue some guidance on how to redo the plan.
Yeah, well, it's contained in the neighbourhood planning bill.
Right, I see that. And I just wrap up on that one, John. So, are you saying that if there are no more houses allocated to Henderson, I don't want to presuppose what you might decide, if there were no more houses, then there would be no need to update the neighbourhood?
I wouldn't want to give that as a categorical one, but that would be my impression, Adrian.
Sorry, gentleman behind you.
Yeah, sorry, Andrew Clark from Southampton Hill. But it really allies to the previous question. How long are these neighbourhood plans going to last? I mean, are they like 2032, like the local plan? Or is it just going to be now, forever? We will need to update it as and when is required. Because some of the small communities, like one of them, same size as us, 140 households, you know, it's a question of resources and maintaining that will be quite difficult.
Well, they're not going to last forever. That's absolutely clear, because we want a planning system that is dynamic. And whether they need to be changed when the district council changes its local plan is an issue that needs to be reflected in each individual plan. But what I was saying in terms of the way the neighbourhood planning bill is going is introducing a proportionate arrangement for that. So depending on the size of the change and the importance of that change as to what you need to do to reflect it. What we're saying is that for many communities that are going through doing a revamped neighbourhood plan, they don't need to go back to stage one and go through the whole thing again. They don't need to put all that effort in that they did the first time in order to see an outcome that reflects the new situation.
So would there be circumstances when they become invalid or not?
Well, there are circumstances where plans can be out of date for reasons, and that's the whole point of this discussion. 5-year land supply is a key one. But if you set a period, if you said your parish plan is to 2027 overland, then it is out of date at that point. So, but it's like plate spinning, isn't it? It takes a lot of effort to get going, but once it's spinning, you should be able to just make some small tweaks that keep it going. And I think that's got to be your expectation, I would say. The other thing I would say, and it kind of has the context of the OAN, and I'm going to say this and then just going to duck, but that one of my hopes for our next local plan is it lasts an awful lot longer than our last one. We're at only 5 years, less than 5 years since we had our last local plan adopted, and we're struggling within 3 years of its adoption. It's my ambition that we write a plan that genuinely is, I think, it's 2033 the current year. Yes. We're on 2033. I'm expecting that to change at some point. But 2033 is the year we're saying our plan runs to. So make a plan that really lasts 2033 without too many changes is pretty ambitious. Most plans need reviewing in kind of 5 or 10 years. But the longer we can make it last, the better the context is for NDPs. So looking at the question that Michael was asking about OAN, even if the OAN gets reduced, which is my expectation and hope, don't expect us to reduce our numbers. We will probably stay at the numbers we're at in terms of overall plans, but just expect to deliver them more slowly.
Yeah, well, can I just finally say then, the longer your plan target period is, the more sustainable it's likely to be.
It is, absolutely. And we've made representations as part of the devolution bid to government to ask them for the ability to make plans that last 30 or 40 years. And at the moment, we haven't got any traction on that, but that's a conversation we're still having. I agree with you completely. It'd be much better to have a long-term plan. Jerry.
Perhaps I can add a comment to that, as somebody who's just started reviewing their main neighbourhood plan. We actually built in the capacity to review it every 5 years anyway, because the way we figure things are, nothing lasts for more than 5 years, no plan lasts for more than 5 years in the current state. I mean, one of the things that I found in starting this process off is just starting off with an enormous evidence base that you can just update very quickly. You're starting off with all the background documentation that you know has been examined. You've started off with an examiner's report. So, we are planning to do ours in something like 40% of the time that it took us to produce the first one. And of course, 40% of the time actually does translate to something like 40% of the effort.
I mean, we wasted a lot of time in the first place because we didn't know what we were doing, quite honestly. We were self-taught. But and the other thing to say is that the interesting thing about that is in going back to the community, you've got a community that's already educated and aware of and supportive of the neighbourhood plan, so you get a much better response. I mean, we're just in the process of doing an every household, every voter survey, and the messages coming back are very positive. Because the other side of that is you're building on what the neighbourhood plan has achieved. And it's easy. I mean, we've been through all the kind of ups and downs and disillusionment and things. We've seen all the stories in the Henley stands. We've been part of for some time. But what's coming out of this is, when you look at it, there are some tremendous benefits. And the evidence of that in Woodford's case is we're prepared to do it again, and we're quite keen to do it, and we've started, and we're on our way, and we're getting a very positive response from the community. So yeah, it does take a while to start to get going. And in that case, I would add to Rachel's tips. I would have a different set of tips. I would say, go find a community that looks like yours, look at their plan, look at their documentation set, look at the examiner's report, because that will jumpstart you. That's the quickest way to do it. The number of people, by the way, that have asked me for word copies of our documentation probably substantiates that. Could make a fortune on it, but
can I just kind of make a comment or a question about the plan out to 2033. So if we said to the village, we'd like to allocate these sites for development in 10, 15 years' time, there'd be a big credibility gap that the developers wouldn't immediately try and build on them straight away. So I think it'd be great to look at a plan that goes out 15, 17 years. The confidence that those sites wouldn't be built on in the next 5 years, I think, will be very low. Do you want to comment on that?
Yeah. I mean, you always, Mark, jump in, but you're always going to have difficulty allocating plans, sites so far down the line. Henley tried it in their plan, and they had some fallback sites.
That's what you just encouraged us to do.
No, that's not what I said. Henley tried it in their neighbourhood plan about having some fallback sites or reserve sites, and the examiner said something like, well, if they're acceptable on the 1st of January 2022, why aren't they acceptable now, or worse to that effect? Which is the point. So, but that's not to say that you can't frame policies that say school capacity wouldn't support development at this point. However, the school is expanding, and by 2025 we expect to do an extra classroom, and at that point the village could sustain a further site, or something like that. And that's a very glib way of putting it, but that's the essence of it. So you've got to talk about the constraints that might prevent development now, but in the long run, a bypass, a road, a new school, whatever, might facilitate something.
Not entirely convinced by that. Sorry?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to take a question over here.
Should make Parish Council. My question is really about the 5-year land supply. As a smaller village, we're at risk for the development point made earlier that we don't have any protection. Yes, we've decided to do a neighbourhood plan. That's taken about a year of thinking whether we should do it. Is it worth the effort? I think it will be. The question I asked about 15 months ago at the neighbourhood planning conference that we was in Didcot was, what is this number that SODC has to hit? What about Schmar? What about Oxford? Then it was Schmar's just a set of numbers. Oxford needs to look after themselves. I'm standing here, maybe I haven't read something, but I still don't know, with respect to what you're doing, or how it's calculated, there are other factors in there. But do we know how to take it from Oxford? Do we know what Schmar is? When is that number likely to be defined? And when will we know, or what's the prediction based on your work in getting extra sites when we will have a 5-year land supply?
Right today, I'm not sure what we're working to, but Adrian will say what figure we've got to. But in terms of the Schmar, our figure on the Schmar will be determined through our local plan inquiry. So we will be putting, we've got a further round of consultation to go on a local plan later next month, early March, will be coming out. So look out for that. Pardon? End of March. Another set. There'll be another set of consultation on a local plan. Then we'll have our submission version, which we'll get in the summer. That's the point at which we will say that's the Schmar number. Well, that's the OAN that we're going with. That's the figure we are targeting on this basis. The unmet need part from Oxford City, of course, is difficult to define, because until they've got a local plan, there's no way they can reasonably say this is what our OAN is, and this is the debate we're having with them. Now, as John alluded to, we're in a slightly tricky situation in every other district has thrown in the towel and said, oh God, we'll just run with it. And I'm the only one left saying, I'm not prepared to accept it. We're taking an awful lot of legal advice about what that is, and I can't say, well, we'll be in 6 months on it, because it's, it's navigating a park. I don't want to get to a planning inquiry in early next year, and then this year, early next year, and the inspector laugh and say you should have done a deal with the city, go away and get that sorted, because we'll look bloody stupid if we do. So I can't say exactly what's going to happen. I'm hopeful that my friend in the House of Commons is going to make sure that the law is very helps us a lot in that sense.
Sorry, did you say you were allocating some?
Well, we've consulted on 3,150 houses. That's what we have consulted on, and that sits in our current preferred options, that figure.
And now I can get some assessment.
In terms of numbers,
when we might get 5 years.
As to when we will achieve kind of the 5-year supply that you're asking, I mean, that's difficult. Clearly, when we have a local plan in place, that will trigger it because it's dealing with the Shemara numbers. What we are doing, we are monitoring and bringing forward as fast as we can some of those big sites. So North East Dixon, for example, we have a resolution to approve, so we've counted those numbers coming forward. Wallingford B, for example, which is starting allocated in our core strategy. Again, that has got the resolution to approve, sorting out section 1 and 6 will be issued that hopefully fairly soon. That will, and we're trying to encourage them to get on and build those houses. Because that's the problem, is that if we don't get those houses built, then actually we'll continue to have the supply there, but actually need that rolling number of houses completed to complete that rolling program of 5-year supply. So to give you an answer when we'll be there, I don't know. I mean, we'll definitely be there when we have an adopted local plan, absolutely.
It will be?
Yes.
So it'll be by early 2018?
Yeah, by when we get the decision from the inspector, that's when it has that material away.
And at that point, we won't be having developers getting advised that because we don't have a 5-year land supply, get a good application.
Absolutely, yeah. So the Vale White Horse from El Hatton has just been through a process. It had an inspector's report that came in November, and they adopted the plan in December. They have 7.1 years supply of land. And now, in terms of any argument on the 5-year land supply, they're still challenging it, I might add, but we have a very strong case now to defend our position that we have that supply, because we have an adopted plan in place.
Thank you. Keston?
Kester George, Harston. Surely neighbourhood plans are built on a false foundation until you sort the concept of 5-year land supply. Isn't it nonsense that the concept at the moment is judged on starts over which developers have control and not on approvals over which planning councils have control? To blame A for something that is in the control of B is logically absurd.
Well, I agree with you. I agree with you totally.
But you're bringing this about.
I hope so, yes, I hope so.
Well, I think it's absolutely crucial to the time we're all spending on neighbourhood plans.
Sure.
That was my point, and I was going to ask, Mr. Duffield said he was encouraging the developers. Well, does this encouragement have any teeth in it? Because that seems to be the problem.
The control. We will do everything we can where we've got permissions or resolutions to give permission. We will do everything we can to encourage developers to get out there and start building things. There's a limit to our, as Casper's pointed out, there's a limit to what we can do. Ultimately, developers, they have control of the town.
Can you instigate other issues? Is Mr. Howell's white paper
Sorry, it's not my white paper.
No, sorry.
It's the white paper that I'm waiting for expectantly,
yes.
just as you are.
Is that what's going to produce?
Well, I don't know. I hope that it's going to have something about it, but I'm afraid we will both have to wait and see for that.
It does speak to compulsory purchase of owners working for plans.
There is talk about changing CPO powers and moving those around, but those are very long term. Even if you start off, even if they were tweaked to make them easy to use, you're still looking at a process of 3 or 4 or 5
sure,
years.
but maybe there's some taxation, encouragement to expedite the process.
There's lots of really interesting conversations about having, the council tax being liable for the minute you get permission, and making developers put
interesting ideas about trying to prevent this notion of land banking. Whether there really is land banking or not, I think is a bit debatable. But I think that Kester's point is the most important one, which is that we are responsible for the 5-year supply, and yet we don't actually build the houses.
You don't have the power to actually.
We could build houses, and again, watch this space on that front. But I mean, that's not the job 5-year land supply.
We're almost running out of time, so can I make these the last 2 questions, please? Lady here.
We've recently been approached, Greenbelt land owners, whether or not we're prepared to offer our land up for development. And really, that was commissioned by SODC. And either we believe in the Greenbelt or we don't. So I think it's rather extraordinary. I mean, is this something that then goes towards your land supply?
Are you saying that SNDC has offered to buy your Greenbelt land?
No, there was a study. I was approached on some land which is Greenbelt, whether or not it might be appropriate to develop. Was I prepared to offer it for development? Was that for the Oxford unmet housing need? Was that to meet?
I think what you're saying is that part of one of the Greenbelt studies that was done, the corporate site study.
Yeah, that's got right on the Irish.
Right. But that's part of the isn't it? Yeah, that's a different thing.
Well, we didn't understand it. As far as we were concerned, it wasn't going to be appropriate for development because it was Greenbelt.
As a council, we are required to produce evidence in terms of what land is available in our district. So we write out, we publicise, we ask anyone to come forward and submit their site and tell us whether the site is available, if it's deliverable, any time, any constraints there are about, a whole list of things we ask for details. We then plot that, we provide that publicly, so you can use it in your neighbourhood plans that are developed. The landowner has said, I'm willing to make my land available for development. Whether it's not, it will get consent, or will get permission, or allocated, it just shows it's available. So we did that process, we collect all this data, and out of that is the process that we then, as a district council, identify land that we may wish to consider allocating. And then you may do the same process. There's nothing about just making Greenbelt or not. We just put an open question to the community.
And may I just add to that, that actually the neighbourhood plan process asks for exactly the same thing, a call for sites. And you get everybody in, this is what you have to do in the whole planning process. So it's common to the neighbourhood plan as it is in
the key thing is if we try to allocate a site in our plan, our local plan, or indeed you try to do it in NDP, where a landowner said, I'm sorry, we're not going to do it for that, the inspector or the examiner would just say you're wasting your time and throw it out. And that's the point of the SHLAR, which is what that process is, was referred to earlier. That SHLAR is about inquiring of landowners, their willingness to do things with their land, regardless of what that land is and regardless of what that use might be. And that is a completely separate process than any allocations policy or any policy. It's called policy off, is that the right term?
Yeah, yes. Don't think that SHLAR is strategic land availability assessment. We use this terminology, but that's the definition we're using.
Yeah. Okay, can we take the last question from there?
I'd just like to go back to the question I asked you at the beginning of the session, which was if we really don't know what's going to happen because of all the speculative land grabs that are going on around Bollingford, how can we possibly plan for what schools, what social services we need, anything, because it's just all up for grabs?
Well, I mean, as a general point on that, I'd be very interested in going around and speaking to people who have been producing neighbourhood plans. And the number of those that have had discussions with their surgeries about how they see the future going is actually quite small. So there is a need to go and talk to them and to bring them into the discussions so that their planning is part of your planning.
It's more about not knowing how many speculative, we've got 1,000 that are speculative.
Yeah, so it is hard, but the fact that it's hard isn't the reason we shouldn't do it.
No, I'm not saying we should do it, I'm saying absolutely.
Yeah, it's got to be done. And you've got the best thing for NDPs is that they can make those judgments for their local area. It may well be that further down the line, some application comes in for a site that wasn't thought about or wasn't imagined, and that adds to the pressure of that. We've seen that already in Henley with the Hen Thames, the leisure centre in Henley, which wasn't considered in the NDP, but fairly quickly came forward with a planning application. You're always going to get that, and then the context of that permission or not a refusal for that site is against the evidence that there is in the area, and saying whether schools of capacity, social capacity, roads of capacity, or whatever it might be. You've got to put a stake in the ground and say, well, this is what we're going to plan on, and then it's the plate spinning thing again, isn't it? You just have to keep catching up when you do.
Okay, go on. Very last question.
Hybrid working model, just a little clarity there. We are gathering data. The thing we keep on coming up against is, for example, our surgery serves more than just one. So we don't know how, at what point is it going to reach capacity? And how do we take that into account and say, well, we can only accept so much because then the doctor's surgery. Likewise, our school serves a much bigger area. At what point is our school going to have number of spaces? We've built it on the playing fields and we've expanded it to a 3,000 people school. At what point? Because we don't know everything that's happening around. Now, we are trying to put stakes in the ground, but we run into this dilemma. Where do we go? What is the realistic allocation for housing in our area, but also what additional infrastructure do we need? What can our infrastructure take? And this is something where we're going round and round and round, and it's a real problem.
And that's the role, Adrian, of the local plan. The local plan will allocate the number for the wider area, and will specifically look at the infrastructure needs. So there's an infrastructure delivery plan as part of our local plan, which sets out the needs of infrastructure to match that development. You're always going to have a challenge on boundaries. I mentioned boundaries. If you have a school that's just over another county or over another area, then your local numbers don't plan for the use there. The same with a train station or a doctor's surgery. You just have to work with it as best you can and go with that, and use common sense in terms of how far you can get with it.
That's exactly what we're trying to do. But when you do that,
that's why I'm buying so much.
Could you please include the sewage in that as well?
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. We're listing schools and roads, but you're right, the water's in there, big problem with water locally, and then getting rid of the waste afterwards, big problem too. I mean, these are all infrastructure challenges.
I thought that was a good point to end this on, but I'm not sure sewage is a good point to end. But look, I'm afraid we must draw this to a close. And I'd like to thank you all for coming and for participating in this. I think the questions have been absolutely excellent. And I think between us all, we've tried to give you a message that yes, neighbourhood plans are worth doing, and they are an attempt for you to put your opinions, your vision, your aspirations for your community into a plan, into part of the planning system, and to share in the development of that with the district council. And I hope that those of you who are thinking of doing a neighbourhood plan will go ahead and do it, whether you do it on your own or with others there. And to the extent that I am able, I am always available to come and talk to you and to have discussions as I did with Sonic Common, as I did with Woodford, as I did with Tame. And if I can help in any way on that, then I'm here to do it. After all, I have a job as neighbourhood planning champion for the government across the country. I spend a lot of time going around talking to parish councils across the country. Many of the issues you have raised are similar to the issues that they've raised, and it's very good to hear them, and it's very good to have had the cooperation of the district council in being able to tell you what they're doing and being able to address the issues that you've raised. So with that, I'd like to thank our speakers, and perhaps you would like to join me in showing our appreciation.